Hello, everyone, and welcome to my new show, Out of Nowhere. I think your mic's just gone off. Today, my special guest today is Richard Smith, a distinguished speaker, publisher, author, successful interpreter, has captivated the audiences worldwide for over 2 decades with his transformation presentations on the alien contact. Can we please welcome Richard to the show? Hello there.
Hello there. Thank you for having me on the show here, Bob. It's good to be here.
Oh, thank you. Well, how did it all start for you in your
Um,
dreams? And
yeah, so that's always an interesting place to start from. For me, it started with what I describe as my first awakening at the age of 21, in which case um, there was a whole flood of memories that came back, starting with when I was 4 years old up to that point. So the first awakening was at the age of 21. And then I realized, wow, this really started when I was 4 years old. And so all these things that I thought were dreams were now being remembered as memories. And then it explained why they were so strange. And I could never really, growing up, fit them into anything that I could relate to. But I always knew there was this presence in the background of those experiences that I could never see, something obscured that seemed to be somewhat of a mothering figure, like something protective, but something you didn't mess with either. So when I had that first awakening at the age of 21, that I'm guessing was a point where it triggered something. And this obscure entity ended up making herself known to me. And that was the first time I met the being I refer to as the crone, and I describe her in one of the books as a female praying mantis. I do go into detail describing what she looks like, but that's when we started at that point what was called the conversation from that point on all these years. And it was right at that point where I was going back to college from my bachelor's, and it was the arts program that tied in with it. And I think that was a key factor too, because at that point she asked me, would you be willing to take this information I pass on to you and download to you and turn that into the artwork as a form of visual communication, um, to show people, educate them, bring awareness, and basically be a teacher on it. And I said, sure, let's go do it. After I got over the shock of realizing what's always been there since I was 4 years old. So um,
exactly.
it was something that took a little bit to accept, because the first time I saw her, my immediate knee jerk reaction is, um, I know you, but how do I know you? I don't get it. I've never seen you before. And that's when we had that long conversation of her always being there, and basically being there for my mother and my grandmother too along the way. So there's a lot to be said in just that synopsis alone for the
See, funny
phenomena
with
of alien. Yeah, for the phenomena of alien contact to be generational and oriented towards family bloodlines. So, uh,
yeah, just yeah. I
yeah,
think you're saying about it runs in your family, don't it?
yeah, definitely. So that's when I realized it's been going through the generations in my family all along. So that's when it first came to light that this phenomena, if you want to call it extraterrestrial contact or alien abduction or whatnot, UFO sightings, it's all related to family bloodlines around the planet that have been tracked for generations. Um, so that's when I started participating in the downloading with the information. And that's where it began for me.
Yeah, tell you, what about the Fox News, the media? They have a lot to say about things sometimes, don't they?
Yes, they
Especially
do.
Fox News.
Yes. It's sometimes a little difficult to you get used to it over the years, but in the beginning it was very frustrating to see how the experiences I was having weren't really matching up with the way the media was canvassing the whole thing. So I was like, that's not right. Why are you depicting it like that? And why are you using this kind of headline and sensationalism like that? And then, of course, you look over the long history since the 60s and you realize, yeah, of course, this is all part of that motivated agenda to slander the whole thing and discredit it.
You know, when we talk about aliens, what do you think their agenda is?
So, along the way, to answer that, I learned of an ancient or esoteric understanding, flesh and bone versus wood and stone. And it relates to the galactic community as well. You have those that are here on the flesh and bone side, and that's a metaphor for those who are invested in our humanity, our development, our ability to live in equilibrium with the planet, and a value of the planet because the oceans we have here are held in high regard. And so the planet's ecosystem and our interaction with it as bipedal human beings at this point in our evolution is very important to them. The spiritual development to balance out the technological advancements and so forth. Then you have the flip side of that coin, which is wood and stone. And that's a metaphor for those, I guess you could say, on the opposing team. They're the ones here invested in the tradable commodities that we walk on, that which is beneath the ocean, beneath the land, in the air, throughout the solar system, in which case we are categorized as chattel to be used to reap those profits for them. So there's these two opposing forces here, flesh and bone, wood and stone, good guys, bad guys, however you want to call it. But that's really what it comes down to, is one side is looking at the profit margins of our solar system and sees us as nothing but, you know, a replaceable slave. And the other side's looking at us like, no, every life is important and your interaction with the planet is a key factor to your survival and your evolution.
What could you communicate with these reptilians then?
Well, I communicate with the Crowan and other members of what I describe in the book as the Sisterhood, which is a multi-genotype group, different extraterrestrial beings, including humans, believe it or not, that are involved with this development of the children on our planet, bringing them into the new paradigm with the equilibrium of Mother Earth. But so in that, naturally, you're going to see all types. However, in the strictest sense of reptilian per se, I've had my confrontations with them because there's a bit of a, I guess you could say, a jealousy factor. I even had one of them try to confront me and try to forcibly persuade me to stop doing what I was doing with my writing and my artwork and speaking, and wanted me to gear it towards their agenda on their side of it, the wood and stone agenda. I was like, no. And at that point, there was a rather interesting confrontation where the crone stepped in and basically took this reptilian being and decimated him, basically eviscerated him, turned him inside out, and sent him back through some particular wormhole. And I turned around and looked at her. I was like, I'm glad you're here, but where did that thing go? And she said, don't worry about it. He went back to where it's going to send the message, because basically she sent this thing back in a gut box.
Right.
And she says that will send them a message not to come at you again. Not that that would ultimately stop them, but it definitely sent a message.
Have you ever been followed by anybody like Men in Black or anybody like that, or been threatened? Anybody come to your door?
I've had some strange experiences like that. Um, not enough to be like something that's happening every day of the week or what, but enough to be noticed. There was one particular time that definitely stood out where I I talk about a episode I had, a very involving one down in Roan Mountain, Tennessee, at a conference that was a UFO conference there I was invited to in 2001. And the events that took place there were strange enough, but it was in answer to your question, what happened after it. I'm heading back home, back up I-95 to get back up to New York at the time when I lived there. And I noticed that there was definitely somebody following me. It was just me and this one other set of headlights
Oh,
that must have been about 50 feet behind me, okay, or more. Um, and I thought, well, okay. I mean, there's nobody on the road, which I found was weird because it's an interstate, but it
yeah.
was late at night. Okay, fine. I can accept that. But then this suddenly, as soon as I thought that, this set of headlights shows up way back behind me. And I'm looking at it and I decided to put it to the test. So I go and switch lanes. This thing switches lanes. I go switch lanes again. This thing switches lanes again. Now, it looked like two headlights, but I could never get a good look at it because it never got up close enough. It was trailing me at a very controlled distance.
Right.
So something was following me up I-95 from North Carolina all the way up to, well, the better part of that trip up to New York. And then at a certain point, there were no exits where this thing disappeared. But I started getting a little worried. And then at a certain point, I looked back, gone. Now, if it was still there and just shut the lights off, I don't know. But it was gone for all intents and purposes. Couldn't see it anymore. But it went for quite a long distance, matching me move for move and following me. So that was after that UFO conference where it already had some really wackadoo events going on there to begin with. So,
You know, when you write your books, where do you get downloads then to help you to write, or does it
yes,
just or does
yes.
it come natural?
The there's the crux of it, the grist of it is the downloading, and then the rest is doing some research on it to see where it goes, and then putting the pieces together and turning it into something focused in the book there. So it's basically the same thing I approached the artwork all those years ago, but that translated into the writing because I got I describe at one point where I had this rather mysterious phone call that just came out of the blue. This was at the time that you still had landlines, no cell phones. This was long before that.
Oh yeah.
Somewhere in the late 90s. Okay. I had my handset in my bedroom. I had my own number at the time. And so there was only a select group of people who would know that number. I get a phone call. I pick it up, and all I hear is this strange tinny static, like, and a slight voice, like somebody is trying to communicate with me from very far away. And then um, the voice stopped, and the call disconnected. And I was like, that wasn't just a bad connection. There was something strange about that. So at that time, you had, what was it, star 60 something, 67 or something, where you could call that number back on a landline.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I decided, well, okay, let's tempt fate and do it. So I did it. And at that point, the voice came back on with that same distant staticky. It was clearer now, and it started saying certain things. And I was like, well, who is this? And I'm just sitting there listening to this. This voice is talking to me like it knew me. And it said at that point, this is right on the cusp of the artwork going to the writing. It said to me, you need to take the images and turn them into your words. And that resulted in that very first book at that point called Legions of Light, Armies of Darkness, when I
Oh.
took the artwork and turned it into the book. So that's what kicked that off, was that really strange phone call that really sounded like it was someone trying to communicate from Pluto very far away. So
Oh, there's a question already. Let's have a look.
okay.
Let's put it up there. Question for Richard. Is there any aliens that you know of that want to take over our planet? Not the ones that have been visiting us for thousands of years. Is there some aliens that see us as food? It's an unusual question.
Okay. So I can't say no to that completely, but what I can say is that logically you don't want to eat the slaves. Okay. So you can't really reap the profits there. And that includes the ones that have maybe been coming in the last 500 years, as well as those in the last 5 to 10,000 years or more. Yes, there are bad guys, and I'm sure some of them will probably see us as part of a 7-course meal or a tasty morsel, but those are few and far between. And that could be anything from a certain reptilian race from the Empire of Orion, or a certain insectoid race outside of what I know as the praying mantis types that might see the human being in that matter as just another animal to eat. But for the most part, what you're running into are the more sophisticated ones. And that doesn't mean just good guys or bad guys. That just means the more sophisticated ones that realize and see the bigger picture and basically have to come to the table in a sort of an agreement and say, okay, we're not allowed to overtly interfere. We have to let them follow their own course, but we have our own agenda too. Some of us are here to help them along. Others are here to try and hinder us every way they can. But ultimately, on both sides of the equation, we're needed no matter what, good or bad. So basically, eating us, well, that's not a big thing out there. From my own experience, I can only speak from my own experience.
Do you think there's lots of alien bases under the sea?
I do, and I think there's a very good logical reason for that. Aside from what we've already seen discovered under the sea with ancient monuments and cities that sunk under the water, here's the thing. When you see UFOs come into the planet's atmosphere, they follow a specific triangular grid. If you imagine a bunch of triangles connected end to end with each other, right? Makes a grid around the planet. Well, that's an energy grid that they follow. But that energy grid also relates to the very essence and frequency of stone, ancient stone, any stone, even the pebble you pick up off the ground, but more importantly, ancient megalithic structures. That stone records over time, just like a tape recorder. Right. So when you see these things come to the planet, where are they going to? They actually zip on in, hover over the monument for a brief moment, like they're doing an upload, like taking a jump stick and sticking it into your laptop. And then they take off and go about the rest of their business on the planet to see how things are now. That recording basically gives them an update on where things stand with the human race at that point. And then that's when they get busy actually monitoring things to see how that matches up with the recording. The same thing would apply under the ocean. There's plenty of structures that we're discovering now all over the planet under the sea. And so those are the same megalithic structures. They would have something to record as well. So naturally, if you see UFOs or USOs going into the water, that's one of their motivations. Another thing would be is it's a great place to hide a base down there. Like you know, and if you take that to the nth degree, then you have to think, well, how long have they been there down there and we just don't know about it? The Pacific Ocean alone is a reason why the Navajo refers to the Pacific Ocean as the place of emergence, okay, for spiritual reasons, but that ties in with that long ancient history of extraterrestrials too. So just like in the movie The Abyss, it brings into question, well, if they've been here that long, then what's the definition of extraterrestrial versus what's the definition of indigenous? When do you stop being extraterrestrial and you start being indigenous to the planet?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's true. There's lots of theories on about who built the pyramids. Did aliens help us build the pyramids, or was it just us ourselves?
So you have, that's a good question. In the immediate sense, you might have an academic look at it and say, no, well, here's the reason why it was humans who built it. But what we're not taking into account is that human alien hybridization, that human alien interaction that came with that first ancient generation that was elevated to a much higher level above what the average person would be today. They're still human, because as we're finding out, there's a whole boatload of different things that can be defined as human in the fossil record now, hominid and otherwise. Even a chimpanzee is, because of the efforts of Jane Goodall, is legally classified as part of the human family now. So when you look at these elevated individuals that are carved into the hieroglyphs of Egypt, or into the walls of the Mayan temples and pyramids there all across the world, you realize you're looking at entities that qualified as human, but were more than human, because they had been taught how to do these amazing things, how to utilize the technologies to do them, to move these large megalithic blocks around, and also give them a precision cut like that of a laser and move them into place. Whether it's that they were, because there was an interesting theory that came up about a year ago that I heard of anyway, that said, we just discovered that the pyramids were built from the top down, not from the bottom up. Well, okay, if they're built from the top down, that, opens up a whole slew of conversation then as to how that was managed. So, and I think the coverage of, I remember an amazing story that coincides with the building of the pyramids. One of my all-time favorite TV series was In Search of, with Leonard Nimoy. That's where everything began for me as a kid. Yeah. I watched that. I was like, I want to do that. So Leonard Nimoy was my hero. And so when he did that episode on Ed Leedskalnin, with the whole moving those huge blocks around to create those structures that otherwise would be impossible. I mean, some people surmised he did it with a pulley, but that was only for maneuvering. There was an eyewitness that caught him one day just lifting the block out of the ground with nothing else other than his hands. So that power right there is in our genetics from our extraterrestrial forebears, because of all that genetic mixing that was taking place. So there's only so many ways to mix the gene pool. Eventually, someone like him and many others would come to bear with those kind of capabilities that come out of left field. And I think that has a lot to do with explaining what was going on with building the pyramids. Rocks, stone, once again, going back to the whole idea of frequency, not only do they record things, but they also respond to frequency to move them around. So you know how to do that. You can lift that block off the ground, no problem, no matter how heavy it is, because the atomic mass has no bearing on the frequency running through the rock.
Right. Steph's got a question. Yes, I've been reading a book about megaliths off the coast of Orkney. They predate Stonehenge by a few thousand years. They believe the megaliths culture began up there and then spread southwards.
It wouldn't surprise me if that's where it began and then spread south, because that's at a time when they didn't didn't seem to have much else to work with. The way they pulled off moving those stones into place and structuring them, it wouldn't surprise me if it coincides with what I described for the pyramids too, in terms of moving them into place. They may have used some man-made things along the way, like pulleys and whatnot, but the ability to shift those things over long distances, that requires a much different kind of technology that we haven't been willing to admit to yet.
Yeah, exactly. A question for Melvin. Wait a minute, he's here. Richard, when have you been interacting with these aliens? How long is their lifespan, and do they have a soul like we have supposed to have? And is Jesus and God real? Sorry if it's an odd question.
Well, it's not. It's an interesting question and a loaded one too, but it's a good one. I like it. I do. That's actually a lot of what I talk about in the books too. So that's right on target. So the first part of there, interacting with these aliens, it's been a physical interaction. It's also been during my sleeping hours in what others would just interpret as a dream, but that's when your alpha waves are at heightened level where communication is much easier. That tends to coincide why it happens when you're sleeping, and why children at a young age have no problem with doing this while they're awake. Okay, it's just when we tend to get past the age of 13, we get cut off from that by society, and we're told, well, that's all fantasy and fiction. So then the only place left for the mind to work that out is when you're asleep as you get older. So this is where those contact experiences come into play. But it's been physical experiences too, aboard the spacecraft. Certain scenarios that you get placed in to teach you certain things. My experiences have been, I won't say they're all fun and games. They've been harsh, but they've been educational along the way for the most part. So that's been my interacting with these aliens, mine and my wife as well. My nieces started experiencing things early on when they were younger too. So yeah, once again, the generational thing. Now they're the fourth generation having these experiences. As far as the lifespan, okay, so, and do they have a soul? Well, there's two answers to that. As far as the lifespan goes, I mean, here's something to think about. I can't tell you how long they'll go, but they'll go to the point where we would perceive it as immortality. Now, immortality is relevant. There's no real definition to the word immortality. It's all relevant. If I live for 80 years and someone else lives for 90, well, they're immortal compared to me because they live for 10 years longer and I'm already dead and I didn't know how long they had left to live. So there's your definition of immortality. However, in the realistic sense, here's the relationship to answer that lifespan question that a lot of people have yet to come to grips with as we enter this, the age of disclosure with the congressional hearings going on. The shocking thing that they're coming in contact with or will is that what the military is communicating with, what the military is in contact with, is the very definition of ancient astronauts. So the person who is, I'll use the word person, but the person who was there 1 million years ago that set the wheels in motion for our evolution is the same person who's visiting us now in that spaceship. So that gives you a good idea about lifespan. That is a reasonable understanding too, because if you're going to follow generations on a planet, you're going to want to be the scientist who's there all along, whether it's 100,000 years or 500,000 years or so forth. So they don't have the same cell degradation that we do. Nothing lives forever. Eventually they do die. Some might be 20,000 years, some a lot longer, some 500,000 or so forth. But the ancient alien that we talk about all the time is the same thing as the modern day extraterrestrial who's contacting us now. They're one and the same. That that was the significance in the movie E.T., where he says to Elliot, he came to me too. And I've been waiting all my life for him to come back
Right.
again. So it was the same being. So, that tells you something there. But then we get into the soul. Well, okay. Everything that's living has a spirit, an energy, a vibe, a soul, however you want to characterize it, that gives it that spark of light. Without that, you're just a walking zombie or you're already dead. Okay. So, yeah, they have a soul too. As far as some confusion that people have over the ones that are generalized as the grays, well, there's a boatload of different races that we've just shoved into that category unfairly. And it's understandable. If you were to drop me into the middle of Southeast Asia, I wouldn't know the difference between China or someone from North Korea or someone from Japan or Thailand until I lived there for a year or so and got to tell the difference. Then I could pick them out of a crowd.
Yeah.
But you drop me into that, I'm not going to know the difference. So you drop a human being into the middle of this foray with alien contact, and in that shocking, instantaneous, knee-jerk moment of trying to catalyze the experience or catalog the experience in your mind, you're looking at them as all being the same. They're all grays. Well, over the years, we've realized there's some very different descriptions, basic same features, but very different descriptions along the way. The reason I bring that up about having a soul is that one of the types that I talk about in the books, and I do specifically define them so that it moves it away from others that are coming in contact with genuine beings, is I call them the grays in my book, but then I go forward and give that word a definition. And in that definition, I describe them as cybernetic life forms, supercomputers walking on two legs. So no, they do not have a soul. Okay. And the reason I did that in the book was to move it away from these other type of beings that seem to look the same, but aren't, so that we can start separating. Okay. And so the ones that are referred to the grays, I use that term in the book just to characterize something that is cybernetic, doesn't have a soul, has been here for a long time, and is working on the side of wood and stone. Okay. So they were invented by the reptilian queens to be their eyes and ears across the galaxy, which is why you get these people who describe their experiences as these things looking through them like they're being x-rayed with their eyes. Okay. So it's that kind of scanning effect. You're being scanned by a supercomputer who's then feeding it back to the reptilian queens. And then we have the part about and Jesus and God. Okay. So the individuals throughout history, be it Jesus or Muhammad or Mithra or Noble Drew Ali or Abraham, okay, all these guys, they come along at a time when they're needed within a certain demographic environment to quell the fires of unrest. Okay. So they're a civil rights leader, they're a spiritual leader, but they come from a very particular bloodline that I talk about as the Temple of Solomon, which is on the side of the good guys, flesh and bone. Okay. That Temple of Solomon, which is more of a spiritual element, I have others who like to argue me, well, I know where it is. That's not the point. Nobody cares where it is, actually. The point is, what does it mean in the history of humanity? And it served as a lightning rod of awakening to give us a means of standing up for ourselves and fighting back against the corporate titans of Orion and that kind of iron-handed oppression that is profit-driven. So the Temple of Solomon is where the Christs come from, including Jesus. This is most evident in the fact that all the prophets, including Jesus, always finished out their initiation by going back to Egypt, back to the Great Pyramid, and being tested at the paws of the Sphinx. And that great test is that you get thrown into the the structure, that's below the Sphinx,
Yeah.
completely pitch black. You can't see anything. If you can make it out of that, then you're a genuine Christ. If you can't, then you weren't the original article. So that's what happened. And then when they find their way out, when they find that secret passage out, you end up finding that prophet sitting lotus style at the paws of the Sphinx, because they accomplished the final test. And that's when they're officially initiated into being a Christ. So this is all part of that ancient lineage of extraterrestrial intervention on the spiritual side of things to give us that gene for passion, that ability to, in the Shakespearean sense, I think, therefore I am, instead of just walking around like a zombie or a slave who doesn't know any better and just follows orders, pushes buttons, pulls strings, okay? And it is that gene for passion, because of the Christs, when it passes through or passed through the Temple of Solomon, it came out the other side, known as the Passion of the Christ, and that's where that term comes from. So it's original genetic code that was given to us by our extraterrestrial forebears for the sake of giving us a leg up and an equal playing field to fight back. And that is a lot of where that comes from, with the Christ energy and the Vril power. God, well, that's a very different story. And unfortunately, it doesn't have, you guys believe what you want.
Yeah.
But God is way over here, and the Christs are way over here, and never shall the two meet. And that's the simplest way I can say it, because at a certain point in time, when that original, I'll call it a rebellion, was going on with the Temple of Solomon against the corporate titans, you have that whole scenario taking place with those Canis feudal lords, such as King Anu and his sons Enki and Prince Ea, or Enlil and Prince Ea. Enlil, being the sadistic tyrant, hated us, couldn't stand being here. And at a certain point, to basically get his brother under control, who the brother, Prince Ea, being the one who was giving us that gene for passion to wake us up, that went against the cardinal rule of waking up the slaves. Well, now Prince Ea is an enemy of the state, and he's being hunted like an animal by his brother, who is a tyrannical dictator and master of the skies. So that led to a bit of a bloodbath there. But when things quelled down, Enlil had to be reminded, you can't kill the slaves. Who's going to do the work and generate the profit? Calm down and get a grip. Well, he said, okay, fine, I'll get a grip, and we're going to change the rules. And so he put himself on a throne, a false pedestal, and he invented a term that had never existed before on Earth. The term is GAD, GD, with a lowercase a pronunciation in the middle. And over time, that became mispronounced as God. And he said, from now on, everyone will call me that. If you call me Enlil, I'll kill you. From now on, we're going to reprogram the slaves to understand me as God. And then to go one step further, you can't really have the term Prince Ea or Enki floating around, because then that'll remind the slaves what the truth is. So he had to recast and rebrand his brother as the opposing force. So he says, from now on, the term Prince Ea or Enki is forbidden under penalty of death. From now on, he will be known as Diabal, which is just the lowest of lowest, the bowels of the earth, the scum of the scum. If you're going to be branded something, that would be it. And over time, Diabal became mispronounced as Diablo, and Diablo became mispronounced as devil. So this is how the phrases of God and devil came into existence. The point being that God and the devil are tied at the hip. They are engaged in a war of sibling rivalry. They are brothers, and the human race is caught in the middle.
Thank you for that, Melvin. Very good. Next question is from Steph. Where do people with elongated heads fit in the whole picture? Are these type of people actually aliens? Many thanks.
Once again, you have that. It's a good question too. Um, this is where you tend to have that mix along the way between the genuine article and those who were trying to mimic it. So that original ancient generation, they would have had, because of that mix between human and alien, they would have had the extended cranium to make up for the brain size. It had to fit somewhere, and that's the way it came out in the genetics. Because that original generation were revered as the holy of holies, the gods of gods, then you had the others along the way as time went on who tried to mimic that by doing that to their children, which is kind of horrific to think of. But so the question has two answers. It's a double-edged sword, so to speak. That the genuine ones with the elongated heads have that human alien genetics going on there, that mix that resulted in that. And then the ones that came later on, not so much. They just, unfortunately, not knowing any better, they were trying to emulate what they wanted to be and mutilated themselves, so to speak.
Right. Thank you for that, Steph. Don't you think a lot of young children now, between the ages of 5, 6, and 7, interact with alien beings? And
Yes. Yeah. There's a big difference between when I was a kid versus when my nieces were kids. They're a bit grown up now. The oldest one is 22. The youngest one is somewhere around 10 or 11. But I noticed a big difference with them. And I looked at my brother, their father, and said, we weren't doing that at that age, right? He says, no, this is totally different ball game here. And I've noticed that early on, many years ago, when my friends were getting married and having kids, I was seeing it happen with their children too. Early on, they were showing very advanced gifted traits, being able to formulate their name on the refrigerator with magnetic letters, and really not having any knowledge before that of what those letters actually meant or how to do that. I saw one do that. I was like, you realize what your daughter's doing, right? And she's only what, 3 years old? Okay. So there's something going on that parents are going to have to be prepared for. I think my generation and the one coming up behind me is a little more prepared for it, to accept it. That the children we're giving birth to now are coming to us in a more advanced state of awareness. I mean, they're still children. They still have to be raised the right way. You can't just go let them run the streets. Otherwise, we're back to square one. But it's in that loving and caring environment that all of a sudden these other things start to come to the surface that previous generations didn't have the capability or the luxury of doing. And that has a lot to do with the flesh and bone investment in humanity. Those extraterrestrial beings, they are in many ways directly involved with that, because they know that for things to change, you have to basically target it in a grassroots movement from the ground up. You can have all the crop circles you want around the planet. That's not going to change the mindset if you're not targeting the younger generation to begin with.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's very strange how children react these days. I know when I was a kid at 5 years old, my mum used to say, "Oh, you're talking to," but I had a spiritual friend then. And I don't think things have changed over the years. I think kids more now are more intelligent, like you say. They pick up things more. And when you talk to a lot of families, they all have a small one. They all have something wrong with. They say, my daughter or my son has got a very high IQ.
Yes, that's something else as well. With that, the higher IQ leads to greater problem-solving capabilities early on. which is what's happening here. And so we're going to get to a point where when these children come of age, they're they're going to be standing in judgment of the older generation. I keep telling people, if you don't want your kids standing as judge and jury of your generation, you better do something about it now, because they're going to look at you like fossils who don't belong at a certain point, and they're going to look at you like you are the problem. And is that what you really want to have happen? Do you want to have a brand new definition of a generational gap based on extraterrestrial awareness? And you don't want that happening. So it's a great line. Chancellor Gorkon from Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, great story. He looks at Kirk, he says, if we're ever going to see peace, it's our generation that's going to have the hardest time witnessing it. And that's very true. I think the powers that be are getting backed into a corner, and they're squealing like a stuck pig right now, which is how all this stuff blew up in the Middle East again. Because they're like, well, okay, let's just throw a wrench into the work and decimate that area again and turn that into a cesspool of political Armageddon, which is going to drag everybody else in eventually if it doesn't stop. So there's always this backlash by those who have an investment in wood and stone, those who don't want to see the younger generation take over.
Right.
Okay. So I guess the lesson in that is take care of your children. Don't laugh at them. They're going to need you, even if you can't understand them. And if you need maybe a little bit of a guide to go by, I'd recommend reading the very first book ever written by Arthur C. Clarke. And it's called Childhood's End. And it's the only book of its kind he ever wrote, because after that, he got in his own groove with his own style of writing. But that first book, you're going to need a good stiff drink after reading that. And he wrote that in the mid-50s. So Childhood's End, look it up, read it. It'll be a sobering wake-up call on what's going on right now.
Steph was saying, what about these children with autism? There are so many of them. Are aliens responsible for this?
That's a good question. My wife just recently, about a year or so ago, realized she's autistic, and that opened up a whole floodgate of learning for me, because I was never close to anything like that. And she had to learn on the fly too. She's part of that lost generation of women who were always misdiagnosed from childhood on, and they're only finding out now in the latter part of their life that they were always autistic. So, and it's a wide spectrum of, that's why it's called a spectrum, because as the old phrase goes, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. That's it, because they're all different. And they all have different kinds of, I would say maybe gifts or capabilities, because and some of them can be laser focused on something. And that could be to the advantage of an employer who knows how to utilize that in a fair sense. Scientists, astronomers, laboratory scientists, all this kind of laser precision focus on solving a problem and understanding the whys and wherefores is what comes out of that neurodivergent mind. Things that don't make sense, that doesn't sit well, and it has to be solved. So, and I even just wrote something about that recently, where the person who is autistic, and in the more general sense, the neurodivergent mind, is the one that's going to have that capability of bridging us into official first contact with the galactic community when that takes place. I do feel strongly it's going to be somewhere towards the end of this century when that actually does happen. But as far as the extraterrestrial involvement or the aliens, that's been put in place as a test. If we can't get a handle on how to communicate with the neurodivergent mind, then how can you ever hope to communicate with an alien mind? It's on the same level. Okay. So the sooner you learn to accept, and not just accept and be aware of it, but also um, learn to bridge that gap of communication that seems to be there between the neurotypical mind and the neurodivergent mind. Once you learn how to handle that and deal with it productively in a fair manner and see that person as equal to you, then you're on the path to really approaching that wider spectrum of communicating with aliens, because that's going to be a shock to the system. I can tell you that. We're not ready for that at all. There might be some of us out there in a very small minority who are doing it right now. But as far as the general population goes, we can't even really get past things like communicating with someone who is autistic. Well, if we can't do that, then how can you do this? They go hand in hand with each other.
Good question, Steph, for that. Well, I was going to say, you know, we talk about the future. Do you think we can change the future ourselves then?
Do you think we can change the future for
Ourselves?
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
I am hopeful about that. I think we can. I think everything is coalescing in a manner to where people, and when I say this phrase backed into a corner, I don't mean it in a bad way, but I just think we're getting to that point where we're being backed up against the wall and saying, you need to make a decision, change your paradigm or die. And that's the choice that our generation is being presented with at this point. And we need to make that decision for the sake of the younger generation, for the sake of the galactic community, for the sake of our place in the cosmos because of our cosmic origins and our human origins, and for the sake of the planet itself, and our balance with it, our ability to live with it. Because our backward solution, as amazing as it is, and I'm all on board about space travel, but this whole mentality of let's go colonize Mars. Okay, well, what are we going to do? We're going to bring more plastic, more toxins, more garbage to what, Mars? And if you look at our ancient history, where's the lesson there? You want to change, then this generation, our generation, needs to look at what happened to Mars, because we did that. Mars is decimated because of our ancestors. And then those ancestors had no choice but to leave Mars and come here. Okay. And then they learned their lesson. But then this other, if you want to call it a negative element, started creeping in, and we were brainwashed to go back to our old ways. So what we're doing to Earth now is what we did to Mars millions of years ago. So the idea of going back to colonizing Mars is a real kick to the teeth, cosmically speaking, because you're going back to what you destroyed in the first place, and you still haven't learned your lesson on this planet. So if we learn that lesson, yeah, we can change, but we have to broaden our scope and look at the rest of the solar system and realize, okay, where have we been? What kind of damage did we wreak over there? What are we doing here? Because here, we're looking at it from an isolated perspective, and that's kind of hard to get some people on board until they see it rearing its ugly head right in their face. But if you have something else to compare to, another planet per se, then you have an argument that says, yeah, here's why you can change your mind. Look at what happened there. Look at what your ancestors did over here.
Joanne's got a question here. There's been speculation of, is it Rhesus negative blood types are alien in origin? What are your thoughts on that?
That is, once again, something that has passed down through the generations from that extraterrestrial mingling. It also comes from other times when other races have basically sideloaded certain genetic traits into us that weren't necessarily there naturally. We're finding out, looking at the genetic code, that there's a certain part of our helix and our genome that can't be answered for. And it's not a case of, well, they're just calling it junk DNA. That's nobody's even really saying that anymore. What they're admitting to now is that there's certain parts of our DNA strands that cannot be explained. We don't know how they got there.
Very good. How long we got? We've got around 5 minutes left. Tell us a little bit about your artwork.
Oh, sure. That's where I had started off all those years ago, and a lot of it is, well, I guess all of it really is themed around extraterrestrial topics, social and cultural topics. Basically, it was the whole series from beginning to end was basically taking that profane element of extraterrestrial contact and putting it together with the mundane elements of our lives and showing how the two exist on the same plane of existence and that they were never separate from each other in the first place. If people want to see the artwork, they can. I actually have it on the website. If you go to ufoteacher.com, you can click on gallery at the top. You'll see the artwork there. If you want a really good explanation as to where I was coming from for each piece and why I did it, you can actually read that in the book. The third one in the trilogy, I just finished the book and released it last month. It's The More, the Mason, and the Alien, Rise of the Invisible College. It's part 3 in that trilogy. But towards the end of that book, I get into how the Invisible College relates to music and art and how it communicates with us that way through the generations. And so I decided, well, here's a good opportunity to go back to the 90s and talk about the artwork, because I hadn't done that in a couple of decades. I hadn't even thought about the artwork until I was finishing up the book, and I figured here's a perfect opportunity to actually set the record straight and describe each piece in detail. So if you want a good companion piece for looking at the artwork, you can get that from the book.
And where can people get your books?
Right now, if they go to ufoteacher.com, I have the links on there, but you can find it on Amazon. Okay, it's there. If you go to the website and click the link, it'll take you to the right one. There's some older, outdated versions out there. So I tell people, as far as the trilogy goes, if it doesn't have the phrase Trilogy of Light attached to it, then it's not the right one. So there is a page on Amazon. I linked to the website on ufoteacher.com that does take you directly to the trilogy, and all 3 books are listed there.
And what you got planned for the future yourself then?
So, well, for my wife and I, we're hopefully before the year is up, we're planning on moving from New Mexico over to Florida because that's where all the family is. But as far as my projects go, yeah, we're looking forward to it. And because our daughter's getting married next year, 2025. So we want to be back there on the East Coast to see that. As far as projects go, now that I finished the trilogy, next month in June, I am releasing a 25th anniversary edition of the prelude to the trilogy. The very first book, Legions of Light, Armies of Darkness, that I put out in 2005. I figured, okay, that thing's been floating around now like an orphan. It's time to bring it back into the fold and update it. So that is being released in June on Amazon. It's on the website, so stay tuned. It's all there. But as far as writing overall, my next endeavor is to now take everything I've done with the books and now start targeting official first contact. So that's going to be my next project.
Oh, sounds interesting. Sounds very interesting, Richard. I know Joanne just said, enjoy tonight. Thank you, Bob and Richard. What a great show.
Thank you. And I saw Richard, Melvin's comment too. Awesome. Thank you, Melvin.
Yeah, Richard's there. Thank you very much for your valid answer. Much respect, Richard. Yeah, so it's been an interesting night. Bob, please, will you ask? Oh.
Hey, it's Bob's show.
Out of nowhere again, please. Very interesting and knowledgeable. Steph just said, brilliant show, Bob. A great guest. Thank you, Richard. There you go.
Thank you all for being here too. It's been great talking with all of you.
Oh, yes. Thank you again. Yeah, it's been wonderful. It's enjoyable. It soon goes the hour. The hour still soon goes very quickly sometimes.
Yes.
And because I'm doing it on my own now, I can have a 2-hour show if I wanted, you know. But at the moment, I'm still doing an hour show. But if it does run over, I'm not bothered no more now.
Okay. Okay. That's good. Yeah, I mean, I'm game for it. If you know, if Bob has room in his schedule, then Melvin, sure.
Yeah, I'll have another look. I shall have another look further down the line, and I'll give you a shout.
Okay, fantastic. That would be awesome.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes.
But thank you for having me as a guest today. I know we're coming up to the
thank
end,
you.
right? Yeah.
And I'll send you the link to the program as well.
Fantastic. That would be awesome. I much appreciate it.
Post it on your page.
Anybody who wants to reach me, they can just go to the website, ufoteacher.com. It's been great being here. Thank you, Bob.
Yes, thank you again. It's been wonderful.
Have a
you
good day.
take care.
Yes.
Yeah. And have a rest of you. Have a lovely afternoon wherever you are. It's been raining here all day today.
All right. See you later. Bye-bye.
See you later. Thank you. Let's finish that off.